You can write out all my documents. That'd be great. What's going on? You look like you're a little
enjoying the weather.
again.
Yeah, we were out doing some biking and hiking, taking advantage of the couple of days. We haven't hit the ball yet, but we need to do that before we get
We
out.
haven't hit the ball.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Coming up in May, right? That'll be fun. You'll enjoy Michael O'Brien, great guy.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're coming, so, like I said, I can do one lucky
Well,
putt.
Staley's the horse, he's a good player.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So we'll be sure.
Flowers too, yeah. It'll be fun. Yeah. So how's the boys?
Well, he's good.
And your daughter?
Going in
still
tomorrow to
living?
see my oldest guy. His wife's traveling, so we're going to take him to dinner.
Okay.
Sam's just about through his first year at JP without sleep. They sent him out to Penn State this past weekend to recruit, and it was their Blue White spring football game, so it was kind of a multi-purpose.
Nice.
So they had a good time. Margaret's just about to start here for medical school. So she just got her surgical rotation for 2 months at Lehigh Hospital. July and August, I think. Well, fourth year they just go, third year they kind of decide what they like, and then fourth year they do 3 or 4 months of the 2 or 3 things they like, and they graduate, and they have to match with the system. Okay, so that's the next big thing, actually get a residency. Surgeries, 5 years.
5 years? After.
And you start getting paid a lot, yeah, still get some training.
I guess that she's probably going
have like a hodgepodge thing today.
I'm standing right here, and I saw you walking by, it's like your staff.
Look at your jeans, dude. She's like world.
So these are all the
So does she now, get invited to
Invited to probably Olympic trial.
and then
LA is part of the trials. They only take 3 or 4 out of 60.
So she can actually make it a big jump.
Well, she's big blonde,
Yeah.
top in the world.
But she would be going in for US. Oh, but you're saying all of those
They're
are
US citizens.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Which is
possible.
what
Maybe I'll just pay you.
All right, I can help with that. Thanks,
Beaten
Frank.
7 or 8 professionals. Did you do one of these already? Anyhow, they're all good. How about you?
Yesterday.
Good. Little ones are growing up, and yeah, they're all playing lacrosse, which is fun. And BJ scored the winning goal. Which is awesome. It's like one of those, hey, a few out, on second, analogy, and he hits the home run. And I was like, stay in the water.
No, I did not.
Right outside, but.
Hi. Good. How are you? All right. Let's see. I'm gonna do my make sure
This year,
it's
he's just
on
Maybe
point.
does Darren have to do one too? I don't want to.
No.
Until next
You
time.
will. Yeah. Next year you will. It's for the following year. So this is actually for 20.
Yeah, so he's kind of crossed that barrier, being just a very good skill.
Hi. Who's on the phone?
Matt Perk just jumped in. I'm headed over. I'm just going to be a couple minutes late. Someone's going to call in, so I'd be available for a roll call.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Matt.
He's calling in.
I'm going to go to mute.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good, Ed.
What do you think about that?
So, Judge, I have to read these two, right? These are two components
All
of
the
this.
ones, yeah, they're exactly the same. One's for employees.
Okay,
The first one's for 4 is for employees and 5 is for boards. They
okay.
say the same thing.
They basically say the same thing, one is for staff. and one is for-
Absolutely, word for
Okay.
word.
Got it. Thank you very much.
I got you the treasurer's report this time.
Thank you.
I got him.
may just slide it over to
Well, yeah.
John.
I actually gave him a copy as well because I didn't know
Yeah.
how you
Oh,
guys voted. Yes.
Okay.
So,
Do this one, I'll start next one.
okay, no problem. And I have it also on there. So.
On the presentation, sure. Okay. So, yeah, we walked through it yesterday, and I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Your last meeting, I'm like, I finally remembered to give him a copy.
John, good timing, huh? You come in, the big lunch, the better lunches. Absolutely. Although I did bring a couple of these if you like. So, did you like the, well, if you want one, I have one for you.
I didn't bring a lot because I mean, obviously.
Okay,
I'll
I'll
say for
share.
anybody who hasn't had one yet, 'cause I had one the last meeting, that was really good.
You liked it, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
So we're
you.
making some minor tweaks to it, but generally the feedback has been really, really good. Yep, so I'm thrilled, and then we're gonna come out with some additional flavors, so raspberry, peach, mango, and lemon.
Where are you gonna market it?
Here, right now in the Lehigh Valley, we'll start here, and then we'll go broader across the state. And then we'll take it from there, you know. It's a distribution game, as you know, and that's heavy lifting and heavy capital. You know, and then getting point of sale, getting production, getting trucks, all that takes a lot.
Shelf space.
And shelf space, yeah.
Exactly. That's always entertaining.
But it's a interesting business, you know. What I enjoyed about it was, I mean, it's all encompassing. You have every function, you know, from operations, sales, marketing, finance, legal, I mean, logistics, supply chain. I mean, that's actually a big one. That's usually kind of not top of mind, but to get, you know, this product from flavor houses, fields, and production and co-packing plants, and, you know, shipped across the world.
Who's doing the production for you?
Pittsburgh. Oh, okay. I have a Schneider's, it's a dairy out there. Yes, sir. And I used to know when I was over at Iron City. Okay. So they're doing it for me, and they did a nice job on this one. It's a family-owned operation. I know. Salt and air type. You know, it's rubbing off. It was nice to partner with them, and they're going to probably be my distributor west of Harrisville. If the product, of course, stays whole, you know. It's always partly
Okay, very
luck,
good.
it's partly, you know, product quality. Marketing is a big thing.
Yeah, it's right now.
Sometimes you have all these great products, never see the light of day because they didn't have
Okay, thank
marketing.
you.
Or they were ahead of their time. Yeah. Or whatever, there's so many factors, you know. Hopefully the timing is decent on this one.
Good luck, I hope that works well.
Thank you. Very much.
Mike's sitting on the other.
So
I have.
I know, he'll say it again.
I mean, if you're looking at that one,
Part. The judge is just going through.
I know Mike wanted to do the Didn't he tell you that?
Yeah, because he said 30 minutes.
Yeah, so I know.
Flow through these first and right.
yeah, I think so, but then, you know, you're approving resolutions quickly, committees, and if you want to drop rates on those.
Okay.
What's that?
Mike was on the executive committee.
We're just giving a few more minutes, waiting for a couple media members. At Colin's request.
How are you, Tom? Good, thanks.
Yeah, she said do the pledge of allegiance for roll call and the elected officers. John's gonna run that right up front. Yeah, that's the proclamation, so we'll do that after the election officers and get them underway. Then we'll do the public comment and then jump into executive. Colin, okay? Okay. All right, everyone, call the meeting to order. And start with a pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, so that roll call.
Sure, sir. Brian Gaines.
Here.
Chuck Diacon.
Here.
Mike Dowd. Frank Facciano.
Here.
Glenn Geisinger. John Hayes.
Here.
Larry Hemberger. Ed Lozano.
Here.
Jeff Matzkin.
Here.
Glenn Reedman,
Present.
Ted Rosenberger,
Here.
Mike Schwer,
Here.
Matt Turk,
Here.
Christopher Worley, Tara Zirinsky. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay. All right, we're going to shuffle things around a little bit today at the request of Mike Dowd, who is Mike calling yet? Is he?
He should be on the phone. I'm not
Okay,
sure.
we're going to start today with the election of officers. That's John Hayes's committee, and John, appreciate all the hard work and culling through and getting that on the table. So we'll let John run through the election of officers, and then we'll follow from there. John?
Okay, sounds good. To recap, we talked about this at the last Board of Governors Committee meeting. The nominating committee met on a couple of occasions. Came out with a slate of nominees as follows. Chuck Diacont for chair, Ed Lozano vice chair, John Hayes treasurer, Brian Dames Northampton County exec appointee, and Matt Turk Lehigh County appointee to exec. Brian notified us yesterday that given some work changes and life changes that he has right now, he would decline that appointment. So we are thus removing Brian from consideration for Northampton County appointee to exec. And the nominating committee did not get a chance to reconvene between last night and today. So myself as an individual, I would nominate Glenn Geisinger as Northampton County exec. So nominating committee, the first four, again, Chuck, Eddie, myself, and Matt. And then on a personal basis, I would nominate Glenn.
Okay, any discussion on the nominations? Okay, hearing none, can we roll call this one? Yea or nay?
Just the off persons.
You'd have to do each office individually, so.
Okay.
The first one is
Go ahead.
chairman.
So chairman, we need a motion.
So move.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I think we have to do an individual roll call, just so it's on the record. So can we go through the list and
Okay. So for chairman, Brian Dames, yea or nay?
Yay.
Chuck Diacont,
Abstain?
Mike Dowd, Frank Facciano,
All right.
Glenn Geisinger, John Hayes,
Aye.
Ed Lozano,
Yay.
Jeff Matzkin,
Yes.
Glenn Reedman,
Yes.
Ted Rosenberger,
Yes.
Mike Schwer,
Yes.
Matt Turk,
Aye.
Tara Zirinsky, Vice Chair, Brian Dames,
Yay.
Chuck
Hey, everybody,
Diacont.
I'm finally in. I apologize.
Hi, Mike.
Bye, Mike. Yay.
Hello. Hey, guys, sorry.
It's okay.
Finally got through.
We're doing the election of officers at the moment, and we are taking roll
All
call
right.
for Vice Chair at this point in time.
I think you can ask him how he'd vote for.
All right.
For Chair? How
I voted for Chuck.
I thought you liked me.
Been friends for a long time. I thought I'd impose some pain.
Okay, so so Vice Chair, Ed Lozano. So Chuck Diacont, you said yay?
Yay.
Mike Dowd, yay or nay for Ed Lozano?
Yay.
Frank
Yay.
Facciano?
Yes.
John Hayes?
Aye.
Ed Lozano?
Abstain.
Jeff Matzkin? Glenn Reedman?
Yes.
Ted Rosenberger?
Yes.
Mike Schwer?
Yes.
Matt Turk?
Yes.
Tara Zirinsky? Next, Secretary Treasurer John Hayes. Brian Dames?
Yay.
Chuck Diacont?
Yay.
Mike Dowd?
Yay.
Frank Facciano?
Yay.
John Hayes?
I guess I can't vote against myself, so I'll abstain.
Ed Lozano?
Yay.
Jeff Matzkin? Glenn Reedman?
Yes.
Ted Rosenberger?
Yes.
Mike Schwer?
Yes.
Matt Turk?
Yes.
Tara Zirinsky? Okay, Lehigh County Rep, Matt Turk. Brian Dames.
Isn't it only the
These are the Lehigh County
only the
members
Lehigh
who
Valley
vote on
reps
that.
can vote on that? Isn't that right?
got it. Okay, here we go. So this is Lehigh County. Frank Facciano.
Yes.
John Hayes.
Yes.
Blair Hamburg is not here. Jeff Matzkin.
Yes.
Ted Rosenberger.
Yes.
Mike Schwer.
Yes.
Matt Turk.
Abstain.
Okay, Northampton County. Glenn Geisinger. Brian Dames.
Yes.
Chuck Dicont.
Yes.
Mike Dowd.
Yes.
Glenn's not here. And Ed Lozano.
Yes.
Glenn Riebman.
No. Tara.
Tara.
And Tara Zarinsky. I'm gonna abstain. I think we should be good.
Okay. Judge? Thank you, John. Thanks, Sylvette. Okay, we're gonna, again, jumping around a little bit.
Air traffic?
Jimi Hendrix.
Is somebody on speakerphone?
Is that better?
That's much better.
All right, we're gonna read a proclamation here. Tom, would you just give a little background, and I'll read the proclamation.
Absolutely. So, ABE is a highly regulated airport. As a commercial airport, we are regulated by multiple entities, one of which is the Federal Aviation Administration. One of their charges.
Whoever is on the call-in, can you put your phone on mute, please?
One of the charges of the FAA is to inspect.
No.
Zero discrepancies on zero, which is the first time.
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign. To enable audio controls, please enter your audio PIN followed by the pound or hash sign. If you do not have a
plaque to present, and since Sylvette didn't have enough time to get a new one made, this is from my Little League in Palmer Township in 1963, so we'll swap that out when we get the real one. It'll serve for the picture. Where would you like me, Tom?
Right in the center, if everybody could just gather around.
Okay, sorry for being tall.
Come on, gang.
Everybody in, we have a wide angle?
Yes.
Got it. Ready, team? 1, 2. Cheers. There we go. One more, just for good luck. Okay. Any others?
Against the, I hope I didn't butcher any names, or if I did, I apologize. Thank you very much.
Great job.
That was my cousin Charlie. Yeah. Yes. Policeman. Same.
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign. To enable audio control, please enter your audio PIN followed by the pound or hash sign. If you do not have PIN,
That's okay. I don't want to disrespect Mike. I'm not official yet.
You're official.
Okay, we good? Get the PA system under?
Before we continue, I don't want to put you on the spot, Tom, but I do think we should once again recognize Tom in particular. I think that was very generous of you to recognize your team, but the work that you've been putting in over the course of many years to achieve a perfect score should not be unrecognized, because that is almost impossible in an organization of this size. And so I know you have personally put in, year out, as the former leader of the operations group. So I'd like to suggest one more time we recognize Tom for a great job.
Okay, next on the agenda, is there any public comment? Any members of the public have anything? Okay, none? Okay, before we jump into the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to recognize Tara Zwinski as our new board member. Tara, I didn't have this opportunity when I jumped on the board. We were in the heat of battle, but if you'd like to say anything to the board or the public at this time, otherwise we'll move on. But welcome aboard.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's a great opportunity, and I've just started on Northampton County Council. A lot of things have changed, and I really want to make a difference in the back out, and I think this is a great place to start.
Good. Well, thank you. Appreciate your participation. Okay, we're moving around today because we have a few folks on the phone, and the first agenda item that we're going to do is the executive committee is the approval to amend bylaws, and we're doing that because we need 10 votes. And is everyone still on the phone? Are we connected here? So,
I'm still here.
This is an amendment to the bylaws which relates to contracts between the authority and authority employees, their families, or their businesses. And the second amendment relates to the contracts between the authority and any member of the board, family of a member of the board, or the business of a member of the board. What this amendment does is bring our current version of the Code of Ethics into consistency with the state statute on ethics for public officials and public employees. At the present time, the bylaws provide that such contracts are absolutely prohibited, whereas the state statute says that they are not absolutely prohibited, provided they're entered into by an open and public process. That means advance notice to the public by advertisement that it's under consideration, scheduling it and giving the public an opportunity to be heard, to ask questions about the contract and to be heard as to whether the contract should be entered into. So essentially what we're doing is bringing our bylaws into consistency with the state statute that's in effect in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This was submitted to the Executive Committee at the meeting on Thursday, and it was a unanimous recommendation that it be adopted. Does anyone have any questions about it? I've distributed to each of the board members a copy of the amendment, the proposed amendment to the bylaws that Mr. Lozano, I understand, is about to make a motion that we adopt this, so you want to spend a moment or two, if anybody needs time to look it over before we get to that stage, you can do so.
Let's take a couple of minutes just to review it really briefly. We, again, discussed it in detail at the executive committee. Executive committee is recommending we move forward. You have the bylaw in front of you. One is for employees, one is for board members, and we'll take a vote shortly.
Okay.
I'm just surprised that we've got to do this in the sense that the bylaw article that we had was archaic and outmoded, and we're bringing this into the present time, that this is really what we should be doing now.
Anyone need any more time? Good? What's the procedure on this, Judge?
Well, so that would be, we have to get,
I'm going to move.
first a motion, yeah, and after the motion, there's a vote, but it's got to be a roll call vote, because we have to, in order to pass an amendment to the bylaws, 10 board members, you must have the vote of at least 10 board members, 2/3 of the 15-member board. And in that regard, Mr. Rosenberger, who has a pending ground lease arrangement, has told me that he will be abstaining from the vote, and I think that's appropriate. That's correct.
Okay, so fellow board members, I move that bylaws Article 18 be amended as follows. The authority is prohibited from purchasing goods or services from or doing business with any employee of the authority or any firm or business in which an employee of the authority or a member of the immediate family of an employee of the authority is a director, officer, or owner or holder of an equity interest equal to or greater than 5% of such firm or business, unless there is compliance with the open and public process requirements as set forth in Pennsylvania Public Officials and Employees Act 65 PA CS 1103F. Secondly, the authority is prohibited from purchasing goods or services from or doing business with any member of the Board of Governors or any firm or business in which a member of the Board of Governors or a member of the immediate family of a board member is a director, officer, or owner or holder of an equity interest equal to or greater than 5% of such firm or business, unless there is compliance with the open and public process requirements as set forth in the Pennsylvania Public Officials and Employees Act 65 PA CS 1103F.
Thank you, Eddie.
We need a second.
Second.
Or a second for that.
You have a second, so let roll call.
Brian Daines,
Yes.
Chuck Dycon,
Yes.
Mike Dowd,
Yes.
Frank Facciano,
Yes.
John Hayes,
Yes.
Ed Lozano,
Yes.
Jeff Maskin,
Yes.
Glenn Weidman,
Yes.
Ted Rosenberger,
Abstain.
Mike Schwer,
Yes.
Matt Turk,
Yes.
Chris Worley,
Yes.
Tara Zirinsky.
Yes.
We have overtime, yeah.
Yeah, we had 12
Yeah,
positive votes and 1 abstention,
yep.
so that passes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. All right, next on the agenda is the treasurer's report. Ed Lozano.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to report the monthly and year-to-date performance for the quarter. And this will be my last report. I will be passing my role and responsibilities on to John Hayes. As you can see on the screen ahead of you, we had another positive month of performance. As you know, we've been honing in on our top line, our expenses, depreciation, and net income. And then we go into a little detail if anybody requires additional information. Todd is on hand and John is on hand to answer or help answer any questions. So for the month of March, our revenue came in at $2.36 million, which is 1.6% ahead of last year and 3% ahead of budget. So good solid performance there on the top line. Expenses came in at $1.7 million, 11% ahead of last year, but that was planned for, and 9% below budget. We'll go into a little bit of detail. The top line is that our expenses increased because of our growing business, adding consultants and G&A to service our growing business. and it came in a little under our plan because there are still some resources that will be coming online, but that are a little bit behind schedule. So we're kind of at the midpoint. We're ahead of last year as planned, but below because some of the expenses are predominantly a timing situation. Depreciation is significantly, as you can see, ahead of last year, $413,000 versus $311,000. The reason being, as you've seen in the first quarter of this year, we've had a tremendous amount of capital expense activity, and so the depreciation number is significantly higher than last year and a little bit higher than we budgeted for, but we expect that to smooth out and come on budget throughout the course of the year. So the depreciation line was $479,000. Thus, our net income, the bottom line, is $216,000, which is below last year, but ahead of plan and significantly ahead of plan. One quick note to highlight is that pension expenses that used to be kind of charged in the second half of the year as they came in is now being spread proactively across each month. So you're getting some of those expenses being charged in the beginning of the year and throughout the 12 months evenly, as opposed to waiting for that expense to hit at the end of the year. That number roughly is about $75,000 a month. So you can see how that has a significant impact on the bottom line. But the overall performance, as you can see, we're ahead of plan on the top line number. Expenses were below plan. Depreciation was a little higher than planned. Net income was ahead of plan. And so we're generally in the ballpark of what we were planning for and expecting. Some timing issues, some major capital expenditures that took place a little earlier, but all in all, a very solid performance. And part of the top line growth, which we'll go into a little bit detail later on, and then Tom will go into more detail, is our traffic is up. And that's pretty exciting. And I think you saw the press release where we have now, I think, hit 6 months of consecutive growth versus last year. And if you recall last year, for the board members who were here, we had some hiccups along the way, and our performance was trending positive, but not at the rate it's going now. So now we have a trend. It's no longer just a 1 or 2 month anomaly. So that's really exciting news. And tied to our top line financials and why our net income is high, every time we have increased air traffic, every time we have increased cargo volume, that flows through to the bottom line because we have incremental ground handling activity, and in particular, parking. Parking is a huge profitable center for us. And the more passengers we have, the more parking we have, the better flow through to the bottom line. Okay, so that's the monthly report. Any questions? Okay, so let's move on to year to date. So this is the first quarter in summary, January, February, March. You can see that we're at close to $7 million on the top line, which is again ahead of last year and 5% ahead of budget. Expenses are 20% ahead of last year at $5.4 million. However, it is still below plan by 4%. What that tells me is that we continue to plan well, plan conservatively, and in particular, manage expenses. Staff has done an outstanding job for years now on this line item, and a very important line item. So congratulations to staff to continuously managing the expenses below budget. Depreciation, as we mentioned, is a little bit higher in the first quarter, but it came almost exactly on plan at $1.2 million and 33% ahead of last year. Again, a lot of capital expenditure activity taking place as we rebuild from years of austerity. We didn't have the financial funds to invest in the airport, and that is contributing to the higher depreciation expense. But the best part, and being a private sector guy, look at that bottom line, $765,000 in net income, which is a really solid number at this point. Again, it is below last year, but significantly ahead of plan. So I think we're going to have another solid year of both top line and bottom line performance if we continue with the trends we have at the first quarter. So any questions on the quarterly performance?
Just a quick follow-up comment on Eddie's comment regarding cash and the ability to reinvest. If you go to the notes that were posted in Novus, at year-end 2017, we had 111 days cash on hand. You go back to December 31st, 2013, we had 3. So when you talk about the economic health of the airport today versus the economic lack of health of the airport 5 or 6 years ago, it's a dramatic shift, and it bears in the numbers.
That is a great catch, and a huge, I think, data point in terms of the financial health and strength of our organization now versus a few years ago. I mean, we were teetering on, in the private sector term, insolvency at those cash levels, but now we have a good amount of cash, and we're projecting continued growth. So, strong performance from an operating standpoint. Customer service obviously is driving that as well, because we're getting customers back into this airport, increasing flight activity, et cetera. So with no further questions, we'll continue on to the air traffic. This is exciting. As I mentioned, last year, our performance was a little bit inconsistent. Some of it had to do with changing destinations from some of our air carriers. Some of it had to do with weather. But for the last 6 months, we have showed month-on-month increases in air traffic and passenger traffic. So year to date, so the first 3 months of this year, we're up almost 14% on passenger traffic. And as you can see, we've kind of broken that out into Allegiant and our legacy carriers. And Allegiant is just performing extraordinarily well at close to 34% ahead of last year. Some incremental flights, I believe, to Florida and other destinations that Allegiant continues to grow from here. That LBIA is contributing to that. But the almost better news is that last year, our legacy carriers were in decline. But recently, they've turned the corner, and now you can see 3.5% growth for the legacy carriers as well. So all ships are rising here in our harbor at LVIA, and that's extraordinarily positive news. So, we are looking for continued successful performance from the legacy carriers and Allegiant. And Tom can address any questions in more detail, if you like, at the Executive Director's report. So, Todd, if you can, just walk us through very briefly. This is just a little bit more of a detailed explanation now of that net income and revenue performance. So,
Brian had a question, Eddie, before you jump in.
Can I ask you a question, or is it appropriate for later?
Yeah, Brian.
So my question is with the growth that we're seeing and with the profitability of parking, how many days in a given month do we ever reach a capacity where we are full, where we are turning people away from parking?
Not at this point. So we continue to monitor that on actually a daily basis. We're always counting cars and taking a look at the capacity of those lots. We do have a contingency plan if the main parking lot would fill, but we haven't had to deploy that yet. So we'll look at the summer as we get into more of a peak travel season for us in that July-August timeframe. That'll be key for us to watch.
And is that contingency removing some of the barriers and redirecting, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there would also be alternative parking in our former economy lot that we would make available up past the multimodal center.
I just know that it's a highly profitable, the parking is profitable. And if we continue the trend that we're on, then, it could be
a good problem.
It could be good news to have this problem.
Absolutely. Agreed.
That is, I was just going to say, that's a great question, and maybe we should consider a proactive plan. I know you already have something in mind, but maybe spend a little bit more time at the next executive committee and business and finance committee on, if things continue to go how they are, when do we expect our parking lot to potentially reach capacity? How do we transition to alternatives? And if it continues to go even better than planned, what's our contingency to address this growing good problem that we may have?
Do you also count Uber, Lyft frequency here? And is that if so, is that rising?
So the stats on Uber and Lyft, we receive reports.
We do receive reports from, we do receive regular reports from Uber. They pay on a per trip basis, so that's been rising.
They pay every time they come in?
They pay per trip.
I wasn't aware that was
Yes,
the deal.
that's the arrangement that we have.
I thought it was like a blanket fee. Okay.
We got away from that. We'd like to get a little bit more revenue, so.
So win-win.
There you go.
Correct.
They win, we win, so everybody's happy.
And we can get you those numbers.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think Eddie's done an excellent job of kind of recapping where we are for the first 3 months of the year. Again, our increase in net income, all that follows through. This really follows through. When we get more traffic, you get more activity on the airport. People are renting cars, people are, de-icing, all of that. It just makes it parking, everything that just flows through. So activity means more money for the airport, more revenue, and that's a good thing. So as we mentioned, that net increase is because of the increased activity. Our cargo business is actually kind of leveling off, where we have 4 less flights for March of this year versus last year. So we're right around where we were last year, so that's leveling. But the nice thing is our traffic is coming from our passengers. So that's a great sign. As Eddie mentioned, our lower expenses, we always try to do a good job of being conservative in our budgeting, and our expenses have come in quite well despite some additional snow events. I mean, that's the one thing you got to keep in mind, that we've had a lot of snow events this season, and that gets expensive for an airport. Got more materials, more overtime. So the fact that we're lower with all these additional snow events and ice events is really a good thing. I feel good about that. We had the property sale in the first quarter, and that's what's showing up in the miscellaneous income. So that's key right there. Again, if you look at the cash, our cash number is about $300,000 better than we thought it was going to be last month, and that's just basically because we got more income. So it flows through to the bottom line, always a good thing. And we continue to monitor this. This is all of our capital adjustments there. You see it in that number 19. All of our recent capital items have been reflected in this number. So that's probably our biggest adjustment from month to month is the capital, the timing of those things. So we really monitor that because that has the biggest impact on our cash from month to month. So does anybody have any questions?
Can I just ask one more question for maybe you and Sean? You mentioned in passing that the cargo kind of leveling off. Is any of that at all due to our capacity to handle them, or is that just decisions on their part, or what's your analysis of that?
In March, was there weather?
Right. So I think what we're seeing is it has leveled off a little bit. We're also seeing the use of aircraft that are slightly smaller in terms of their capacity, the 767-200s versus the 300s, and so a little bit less lift out of that smaller variant of the 76. The other thing I know that we do is we always measure cargo in pounds, the actual pounds that are put on our plane and taken off. Unlike passengers, we count the number of units. Here we count pounds, and I'm not sure, again, if we're shipping heavier items versus lighter items, that's certainly going to change. But overall, I think what we're seeing is the cargo activity has been generally flat in spite of some of the weather. I know we had a few hiccups in the schedule with some significant weather events here that impacted a couple of flights. But overall, about 302 takeoffs and landings just from ATI, ABX, and Atlas, and we're looking at 84 takeoffs and landings from FedEx just in March. So still a strong performance, but we have seen a slight downtick. I expect we'll see that probably carry into next month, into April, the rest of this month, and then probably through the summer. I expect we'll see a little bit of capacity back in. So
thank you.
Sure.
And the other thing you want to keep in mind is with our new cargo apron, we anticipate that's going to bring more traffic, and we're going to be around for the busy season, which is the fourth quarter.
Thanks, Todd.
That concludes the treasurer's report.
Thank you, Eddie. Appreciate that, and appreciate your service as treasurer of the board. I think we went a long way in the last year under your guidance, and John, stepping into your shoes. And you're going to have big shoes to step into. You have to fill that. What's that guy's name? I account? You have to fill it in. 14. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay, next we're going to do the Air Service Focus Group. That's chaired by Frank Facciano. Frank, you have a report for us.
Yes, well, we met yesterday. The Air Service Focus Group seems to be very comfortable and happy with we're about twice a year we get together now, or as needed. And the Southwest pitch was something we got together for years ago and really put a lot of work into. So ad hoc, the Air Service Focus Group is ready to serve. We got together, we reviewed the results of the business travel survey we had sent out months ago. We had relatively good attendance, so you know, represented at the meeting was Air Products, CF Martin Crayola, Discover Lehigh Valley, the Chamber, of course, Lehigh University, LVEDC, Olympus, the Sands, and of course, the airport was represented there. So a good discussion. We had some follow-up items, things that were taken care of. We were talking about Southern Airways at our last meeting, and we got an update on that. Basically, we're going to meet them again in a couple months. But we also yesterday then took a in-depth presentation from Bradley, who we're going to hear from today, regarding airline industry trends. So he gave us long form yesterday. I think you're doing short form today. It was captivating. It was, and no, but it answered a lot. Honestly, it answered a lot of questions that this air service focus group has, like in terms of what can we do, and we learned what we could do and what is really out of our hands in terms of decisions and flights coming in and out and different airlines lines coming in. So I think you're going to enjoy that today. One other thing, kind of related, kind of unrelated, when we talk about the concourse and its use as an event venue, and if we want to use it as an attractor for community events, get people from around the valley into the airport for reasons other than flying in and out to show it off. The chamber has certainly used the space. So if it's something, I'm going to work with staff and just come up with kind of a pro forma. What would tables, chairs, staging, podium, rolling bar, et cetera, cost, and how quickly we could make that back? Should we charge for it, which we expect we would, but we can also give it to, it could be a charitable contribution to get other groups in here. So you'll hear more about that.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
Edit, Frank,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you, and we have to go back. I made a mistake, so that the table's too wide, she couldn't kick me in the shins. She was trying, but we have to approve the numbers, right? We have to
Report.
do a,
Approval of the treasurer's report.
well, I have a motion for approval of the treasurer's report.
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay?
Aye.
Nay? No opposed?
We have to approve the minutes as well.
And the minutes also? Okay, sorry about that. The minutes also have to be approved from the last meeting. So again, a motion for the approval of the minutes. John, thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Sorry about that.
We do have Brad, or you can run through the quick synopsis on the presentation.
Okay. Want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So joining us today from Alevon Pacific is Brad DiFiore. He's been working for us for a number of years and is an industry expert. You've been doing this for over 20 years, is that correct? So I think we always welcome his perspective and insight on the industry and how it relates to what's happening here in the Lehigh Valley. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brad.
Right, thanks. So just a brief overview. Our firm specializes in what we call air service development, which is actually working with airports and destinations on improving their air service. All we do, specialty consulting firm. I've been working with the airport. We had a little bit of a break here for the last 5 or 6 years, but since 2006, I think, I started working with the airport. So I'm quite familiar with the region and the air service challenges. And the thing that's kind of interested me the most is how some of those challenges have remained and will always remain, and some of them, some new opportunities have evolved over time. So go ahead. I think we have to always start with understanding what the context of the industry is. And right now, 4 airlines control over 80% of the domestic seat share, and that's Delta, American, United, and Southwest. Everybody else is sort of small potatoes in comparison. You can see by the breakdown. The next biggest carrier is Alaska Airlines, which has virtually no presence in the eastern part of the U.S. In fact, they just announced yesterday they're leaving LaGuardia. What we're really focused on are the 4 carriers and then some of the small, what we call ultra low-cost carriers, of which Allegiant is a very, very good example of, and we'll talk a lot more about Allegiant as we go through. So when we look specifically at what's going on here, I think that there's three primary issues that we always have to understand when we're talking about the air service environment here at Lehigh Valley. And the context of these has not really changed much over time. And the first and foremost is always going to be the geography. The proximity to Newark and Philadelphia is always going to have a significant impact here. And where it impacts the greatest is when those airports are sort of really, really doing well, when they're in growth mode, when they've got a sort of a wide portfolio of legacy carrier hub service as well as low-cost service. And that's kind of the situation we're in right now. Both those airports have grown dramatically in the last few years, and they have a very, very broad portfolio of services. And that's not really changing. In fact, Philadelphia is growing faster right now than it has in years because American Airlines has decided that that's what it wants to do. And so that's going to have an impact here. Just you all know, you know the consumer behavior and what many of you probably do, and when you're behaving rationally as consumers. It's an easy drive, and that has an impact. So if we start out with that being sort of the one of the baseline issues that we deal with, then we can move forward. Another issue is the fact that oftentimes when you have a big airport in one direction, you try to pull traffic from a different direction, further away. In the case of the airport, we're a little bit constrained because we have competitive airports with similar portfolios in sort of basically the two opposite directions that population exists. So that really constrains the airport into a very sort of tight actual service area when all things are consistent. Where you have an advantage is when you offer a product that isn't offered elsewhere, and that's where we'll get back to Allegiant again in a few minutes. And then over time, and we just had the finance report, the high costs here at the airport have had a tremendous effect on sort of destimulating air service over time, mainly because where most of the growth is coming from, and when you think about Allegiant, for example, what its average fares are, its average fare to Orlando is probably about $80. And when airport costs are high, that just eats into that really quick, because that's not a very high average fare. It's easier for Delta or United to absorb high airport costs than it is for a low-cost carrier to do it, just because there's just not that much revenue to play with for them. So that is a sort of a long-term issue that I know that those costs are coming down, and that the further they come down, the more they come down, the better the airport is positioned in the future. And the more likely, the easier it will be to leverage the advantage of having Allegiant in the market. Just a quick overview. Most of you know there's 4 airlines, 10 destinations. If you take away the Allegiant, which is basically all of this, you have service to large legacy hubs. It's a business. It's a tale of two airports. It's a business-oriented airport with strong service to regional global network hubs. And it's also a low-fare leisure airline to Florida, basically, or airport to Florida. And so you kind of have to view those two things separately because those industries actually operate very differently, the two types of airlines. And one example is here, so Allegiant is the sun logo there. Allegiant's growing, and we've seen that in the numbers. Allegiant this summer is going to be up again. And overall, the airport capacity is going to be up 8%. Now, the key here is that American, there's a good and bad story here. So American's growing Philadelphia pretty significantly in terms of capacity. And they're doing that because of what I was just mentioning. They have a growth plan in place at Philadelphia. They're growing the importance of the Philadelphia hub. So on one hand, they're giving you more seats. On the other hand, those seats are going to help support more flights out of Philadelphia, more nonstop flights. So consumers will still have the same set of choices they've always had. They're going to have more seats they could fly from here to Philadelphia on to the final destination, or more seats they could take if they drive to Philadelphia. So, it's a little bit of a give and take with that. But overall, you can see most of this growth is coming from Allegiant. And if you look back, most of the growth has been coming from Allegiant. If you go back 5 years, this is the legacy carriers, this is Allegiant. So Allegiant's grown 107% since 2012. up to, at the end of third quarter 2017, they were carrying 310 passengers a day each way out of the airport. All the three legacy carriers are carrying 651, and you can see that that has been stagnant since about the time United pulled out of Washington Dulles. Now, what I will say about this, and I think maybe I have slides. I deleted so many slides off the one we did yesterday. I can't remember exactly which slides I have in here. But the thing to really understand here is the legacy carrier environment is primarily driven by business activity, economic activity. That's where the profits come for Delta, American, United. It's hard to stimulate demand for them because the pricing isn't stimulatory. It's expensive. And so it's very hard to influence what they do. They serve their hubs already. For us to go and tell Delta that they should add another flight to Atlanta, they already have 3 flights to Atlanta. They know how they perform. They live and breathe the P&L on those flights. So they are, they're in a far better position to understand the market than any of us will ever be. And so what you end up with the legacy carriers is, it sort of is what it is in those markets. Now, where we have opportunity is new hubs. Where we would say, so to United, look, we think it's time for you to go back to Dulles, and we can build a business case for that. But in their existing hubs, which are great hubs and they're very, very well suited for this market, it's out of our hands at this point. They're going to make decisions on capacity based on their own performance. And as you can see, their decision has been basically not to do much for a long time. And if you equate that with, I would say, GDP trends in the market and that sort of thing, you'll probably find a consistency. And any sort of additional growth the region may have had beyond that probably just leaks and dribs and drabs to the other airports in the region, and also supports the growth that we have seen in the last few years here. So to give you a sense of sort of what how stable it has been, fares for the 3 legacy carriers have actually been pretty stable over time. Since 2012, if you look at it, the average fare that Delta, American, United get on a one-way, not inclusive of taxes and fees, is almost exactly the same now as it was 5 years ago. So they're not getting any pricing power. Now that's kind of true in the industry in general. They just manage their businesses a lot better and they're a lot more profitable today. But that's actually a good news story for the market. So in general, businesses aren't paying any more to fly out of here today than they were 5 years ago. But we do see that it has risen just a bit in the last year or two.
Your comment there that the quarter showed a significant drop, is that more that they tried to gain some pricing power second quarter, it didn't work?
It's hard to say. This seems like a bit of an anomaly to me, to be honest with you. But this is DOT data.
Okay.
We don't have any way to scrub this data other than it is what the DOT says it is. That seems like a kind of a significant jump. Now, sometimes this is second quarter, and if it was an exceptionally strong spring break or something like that, that could have had an impact on it. My guess is the reality is it's kind of more in line with what we're actually seeing there. Okay. All right, so kind of going back to sort of the main sort of competitive situation. So this orange line is 30 minutes drive time from the airport. Within that area, the airport retains 13% of the bookings generated via travel agents, via online, anything that it goes anywhere except for directly to the airline. So Expedia, that sort of thing. The airport retains 13%, 40% goes to Philadelphia, 25% goes to Newark. That number has been very consistent over a very, very long time.
Right. Did you tell us yesterday that didn't include Allegiant?
This does not include Allegiant, that's correct.
So that's just the legacy carriers.
Yeah. So you get 100% of everything Allegiant flies. Allegiant doesn't report this kind of data publicly, and they don't participate in any third-party platforms. So there is no availability of this data. We do know from Allegiant, and they show us their own maps sometimes, that their reach extends further in just the ways you would expect it to, because they have a unique product, which we'll again talk about in a minute.
I'm curious, sorry, if you could just go back about the, I don't know what airport that is up at 8.9%.
That is Strand. Strand.
Is there something, because for a low population base area and a little bit out of the way, why do they have such a high share of our Lehigh Valley?
They have a little bit different portfolio, so they might offer something that is, flight at a certain time of day to a certain hub that is different. Also, some of these people might be right here. They might live like right in this, area where maybe it's.
There's like an inflection point where
Yeah,
there's kind of equivalent to travel to one airport versus the other. So you flip a coin.
If you actually went up and did the same thing for them, you're getting more. I guarantee you're getting more than 9%.
Which would be logical, and that's, the logical part of this is that obviously, the major hubs are pulling a lot of our customers because they have a international product, they have a ton of destinations, et cetera. But it's just a little, to me, interesting that a far-flung airport is pulling such a disproportionate share from our, we have similar products, so I would expect that number to be much
this is
lower.
billing zip code. So it could be somebody who lives here but works up here. There's lots of noise.
So on the business travel side, maybe this is a complete aside, but the billing zip codes, one thing we know about the Lehigh Valley, particularly from the business travel side, is that a lot of the decision making and processing occurs outside of the metro. So you may see a company that has, take ADP, that does its billing out of Parsippany, New Jersey. You might see the billing hit Parsippany for travel that might occur here.
If it's corporate billing, particular, it could influence it a little bit. This is the best we have. This project was done a few years ago by a different firm, but it's pretty consistent. There's no perfect catchment study, but this data is the best that is basically the best we have. But what it tells us is there's still a lot of room. And so now, like we said, you've got 65% of traffic going to Philly and Newark. So if we go to the next slide.
You stand there for 1 second. Just one other point when you talked about the hub airports, Philly and Newark. If you go back 15 years ago, they were awful. I mean, it was brutal to fly out of there. I flew a lot out of Philly, a little bit out of Newark. They're now bad, but they're not nearly as bad as they used to be. So that
I was wondering where you were going with that.
Well, that presents a different competitive landscape than we had 15 years ago.
And it's going to continue, because both airports have pretty intensive capital programs, especially Newark, that they're undertaking. So these are the dark blue is American at Philly, and the light blue is United at Newark. And this just shows growth rate for the 2018 through August. And you'll see that the lowest growth rate is 4%. And in some cases, it's getting up close to 10. In the U.S. industry in general, we're growing at about 3 to 4%. So in most cases, both of these hubs are actually outpacing growth in general. And you'll notice it particularly American at Philadelphia, and that goes to what I was saying before. American has decided to really concentrate a lot of efforts into Philadelphia, a hub that it really neglected after the U.S. Airways merger. In order to do that, they need to create a lot of feed into the airport. And there's nothing, as mentioned this year, there's really nothing to feed from the east of Philly, so it's all got to come from northwest and south, and kind of markets in a direct, maybe 1 hour flying time from the airport are really, really good feeder markets because they can kind of serve all directions. And so that's going to have an impact on here. It's not going to have a dramatic impact, but it does just sort of further, keep the story going that these airports really really are sort of behemoths that we have to deal with.
Hey Brad, on that chart, number 1, is this revenue growth or passenger volume growth?
That is capacity growth. So that's scheduled seats coming into the market. That last one.
No, this one. This one.
Yeah, no, that's capacity growth.
Projected.
So OAG, airline schedules, in order to sell them, they have to be published, and so we actually can count how many seats they're going to be offering in advance. So we know, we know for year over year in July. American's going to be up almost 10% versus last year.
If you ran that same report for the destinations that LVIA flies direct, would you see, are they eating into this airport's destinations?
we haven't seen the impact. This is just capacity. We haven't seen the actual, what happens in passenger behavior on this. Right now, we do know that you had a lot of capacity added last year, or I should say in the past 12 months. And even though that's equated to more passenger volume, it hasn't kept pace. The volume has not kept pace with the capacity growth. So we're actually seeing a load factor fall. Load factors have fallen, I think, pretty significant, 10 points or so year over year in the last period of data that we have. So we know that there's some catching up to do. Capacity here has actually outgrown demand.
But they haven't, this additional capacity is not going to places like Charlotte, Atlanta.
Some of it will be, but this is good. This is spread across all 200 destinations from Philly. Yeah. A lot of this, honestly, is going transatlantic from Philadelphia. They're really building up the transatlantic thing. So that doesn't really necessarily have a huge impact on you directly, but in order to feed that, they're indirectly adding flights from a lot of cities to Philadelphia, and those are your competition. So, for example, I represent Savannah Hilton Head International Airport, and they've gone from 1 flight a day to 3 flights a day to Savannah. Now, where that could impact you is now that they have, if you were going to fly out of here via Atlanta to Savannah, now you've got 3 flights a day out of Philly and probably a little bit lower fares than there were last year. So somebody might just say, I'm going to drive to Philly and fly nonstop.
We want that Savannah flight, though.
Yeah, that's what you want that, right.
And
that's an upcoming slide.
Generally, is this growth business or leisure?
So business growth kind of has been very strong. Like the economy for air travel right now is excellent, as strong as it's been in years. In fact, Delta just reported last week that its year-over-year revenue improvement is 8%. On a unit base, 8%. So that's pretty phenomenal. A lot of that's driven by leisure, but driven by business, but the volume is driven by leisure. And so, kind of both are really good. The U.S. airline industry is in great shape right now relative to its history. The last few years have just been phenomenal. Everything's on fire. So here's the challenge when all that capacity comes in. Is what you have is Lehigh Valley Airport's the dark blue, and then Philly is green, and Newark is red. And you see, this is what fares have happened to fares over 5 years, and you can see this downward slope, and that's primarily driven by the low fare carriers coming into the market, into both of those markets, and adding a lot of capacity. So Frontier and Spirit and Southwest have added capacity in those markets relative to what they used to have, and that's had a general dampening effect on fares in those markets. At the same time, that we've sort of seen, it was kind of following the same path, and now there's been a bit of an uptick in the last year or so. Now, to be clear, this is really important. You don't want to be down here at a market this size. If you're down here at a market this size, that's when Delta, American, United start saying, what are we doing? We need, this isn't helping us. They're going to start cutting capacity, and you start becoming even more and more a leisure-focused airport. You need to have fares that are higher because to make it worth the effort of these legacy carriers to fly into a market like this. So you don't want to follow this path. You don't also want to have too much of a spread either. We kind of want to find the sweet spot. And I can tell you from conversations with the 3 legacy carriers, the general attitude towards the airport is that it's a good market, not a great market, not a bad market. It's a good market. There's not a lot of enthusiasm necessarily, but there's not also a lot of angst about it. So we're sort of in a kind of, I would say, an even keel right now with them. And frankly, when they start getting a little bit higher fares, they might be happier over the long run. Now, I think we're going to see that come down again because of that spread I was telling you about, the load factor, the falling load factors. That usually prompts sort of lower fares.
I have one quick question about Newark and Philadelphia. Do you have any data on how congested those airports are, and is there a theoretical upper limit to how much those airports can grow before it starts being a terrible experience for consumers again? I was recently at LaGuardia on some business, and I literally watched, there were 30 planes in line all day long to take off. And people were waiting an hour to take off. So is Newark or Philadelphia anywhere close to that experience? Because that
here's
would
the
help
thing.
us if it...
Yeah, I mean, it will. Ultimately, in the long run, and probably none of us will be doing any of these jobs when this happens, it will help because there's no runways being built.
Right.
In the congested northeast corridor, there's not any infrastructure growth that will allow basically more commercial airline activity. The best thing we can hope for right now is that air traffic control technology allows for more frequency, reduced separation, that sort of thing. But there a few years ago, New York put out I don't know if you probably saw this, their sort of master plan for what they're going to do in the future. And the answer basically was, billions and billions of dollars to get like one run. They were going to have to move the entire terminal complex at Newark to the west in order to build, and I think pave over the turnpike, and then to build one runway. We're talking tens and tens of billions of dollars. And so, over time we might see some of that activity, but I think the same story is true in Philadelphia as well. It's landlocked.
They'd have to fill the river.
Yeah, and good luck with that.
Yeah.
So where you end up with is secondary airports are going to continue to take on more and more importance. You're not actually a secondary airport to New York and Philadelphia yet. I wouldn't classify you as that. But 20 years from now, you will probably certainly be a secondary airport for Philadelphia. But then again, so will Trenton, so will Wilmington, so will Atlantic City. You're going to see traffic diffused, and it's going to be diffused not so much from these guys, but by your Allegiants, your Spirits, your new business models we haven't heard of yet. They're going to see opportunities in these places, and people are going to say, I want to save some money because, the cost per employment at JFK is already approaching $30, and, 20 years from now, it's going to be $50. And if you can get it for, $15 at Stewart, that same scenario could very easily happen here over the long run. So, I think it's something the airport should be thinking about. But I'm not even sure that might be a couple master plans away before you really get into the, real opportunity. So when we talk about the legacy carriers, and I said, this hub portfolio is actually really good. You got the Newark bus service and the Philadelphia service in the east. You've got your two strong, great Midwest hubs and the two strong, great Southeast hubs. Anything else that most of these you would fly to, and actually flying over the existing hub. So for example, if you said, we'd like to have United service to Denver. Well, to get to Denver, you fly right past Chicago. United's not real interested in that in a market that doesn't have, isn't that big, which is, kind of where we are. So the best opportunity right now is actually going back to Washington Dulles because it helps United sort of with a southbound and westbound portfolio. But the other thing it does, United's doing in Washington exactly what American's doing in Philadelphia. They're growing it. They're seeing the long-term strategic importance of it, and they're finally putting investment into it. And as they do that, the same thing occurs. When you're building a hub, you need to feed the hub. You need spokes. And so Dulles becomes a better opportunity moving forward if they continue that growth. So we'll focus a lot of effort on trying to support their decision to re-enter that market. Okay, so now Allegiant, and we've kind of talked a little bit about Allegiant. Allegiant has been a absolute home run for this community. I don't know where the airport would be today without Allegiant, to be honest with you. They found a business model that identified opportunities and a cost model that created new consumers that has just been absolutely fantastic. So today they serve 4 destinations in Florida and the seasonal service to Myrtle Beach. And that's a good portfolio. And I will tell you that Allegiant performs very solidly here. They actually are big fans of the airport. It's not the lowest cost airport for them, and that's usually really important, but it's actually a pretty high revenue airport for them, meaning you have a very rich local market compared to a lot of other places they fly. There's a lot of people, there's the population's strong, but there's also a lot of affluence versus some of the other places they fly. So really, really strong. Plus, they've been here for so long that they're just ingrained. So we talked to them about what are the next sort of opportunities, and I mentioned here that the 3-4 of them that I think hold some opportunity in the near to midterm to be, I think, probably the one that I would be most enthusiastic about, not just because they're also my client, is Savannah Hilton Head. It's a very, very good demographic match. Savannah's about to become a bigger part of their network in the next couple of years, and I think they're going to grow in that market dramatically. And so the opportunity to connect this part of the world to Savannah is something they're going to be very interested in. So if you haven't been down there, by the way, I'll have to put my plug in. Fantastic. Both Savannah and Hilton Head, great destinations. And then Nashville's a new market for them. They're just starting out there, but I think that holds potential. And then, of course, I think San Juan, we really like to get them thinking about what we call the VFR market, the visiting friends and relatives market. And that's what San Juan really is for most airlines. But we need to convince them that the source market in Lehigh Valley is strong enough, not just that small 30-minute drive, but low fare service to San Juan is actually going to draw from well beyond that. That's where you can actually draw from Philadelphia, in a way that we usually can't do here. So that's going to be, we're going to be trying to make that argument to them in the future. We've already talked to them about it, but we're going to try to make it a little more emphatically.
Brad, just on that point, because American has got a pretty big hub in San Juan.
Actually, they don't anymore. They've closed it.
They closed it.
Yeah, JetBlue's bigger in San Juan now. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But they still have a big
They
presence.
dominate the Caribbean through.
They don't even fly from JFK to San Juan anymore.
Wow. So that is, yeah. And what about the Dominican Republic tied to San? Because it's a
Well,
similar
right now, so
demographic.
Allegiant doesn't fly internationally yet. And they keep talking about it, but we don't know when. And the other thing about the DR is that it doesn't have pre-clearance. So you'd actually have to have a CBP facility here to do it. And they're in line to get pre-clearance, so it's going to happen, I think, in the next few years. Then, if those two things happen, if Allegiant starts flying internationally and they get pre-clearance, I think it's very likely you would end up with service to DR. There's a lot of opportunity from this market to places in the Caribbean if all these things converge. We're almost done. So three points that I want to make because they come up often. People ask about Southwest all the time. Southwest just doesn't fly to markets this size anymore. Any places that they're in there because of a merger or because they did it on a whim a long time ago and now they haven't gotten out yet. But this is just too small of a market for them. Frontier and Spirit are more akin to Allegiant, but because Allegiant is here, are not necessarily keen to enter the market, and also we have to be very careful about what we wish for. So we'd be very careful about how we would approach those carriers. And then the last one, we get a lot of questions about the two important business markets, Pittsburgh and Boston. And the real challenge we have with both of these markets is there's I call it carrier strategy mismatches. There aren't really good airlines to fit the niche of flying this size of a market at this distance to either, particularly to Boston. Boston's more challenging than Pittsburgh. We know we have some a couple possible options to Pittsburgh, but even those are challenging for their own sets of reasons. But
The Cape Airs of the world, or where are they at?
well, Cape Air doesn't have an airplane that could even come close to flying that far today.
Would it be in Boston?
Oh no, not with passengers on it. No, and I don't think. Yeah, there's no lavatory. I don't think anybody would want to be on that service. The range of the airplane's pretty short. I think that's okay. Yeah, and so it really, like I said, the proximity to Newark and Philadelphia will always be sort of the defining factor in the market. But we have a lot of opportunities, particularly if we get the cost of the airport lower over time, that's going to help us, particularly with Allegiant and potentially other low-cost carriers.
Just one sort of theoretical question. So if ABE got some sort of air service grant, and we went out to all the airlines and said, there will be no landing fees, sorry Todd, there will be no landing fees for a year.
Yep.
Like zero
I
landing.
think we already do that. We already do that, yeah.
What's that?
That's one of our incentives to the pilots.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not enough.
No, that's price of entry at this point, yeah. So really, a standard incentive program is going to have basically most of the airlines, most of the airport's revenue items to the airport waived for 1 to 2 years. I'm not exactly sure of the extent of the program at the moment, but most, especially mid-sized airports, that's you just have to do that. And frankly, it usually doesn't have an impact on the bottom line because, as we were talking about earlier, the passengers moving through the airport more than makes up for the revenue that you weren't going to get if the airline never showed up in the first place. And keeping the lights on doesn't cost you a dime more if, So once you paid there's not a whole lot of variable costs associated with, new service, especially when you have a building that has this much, available capacity. It's usually just some human resource type of issues, and then so you with incentive program, that actually, and it's a key fact. If you don't offer it, it's tough. Yeah, it's hard to get an airline to come into a market that isn't like the most attractive market on its own right without.
So that's the bottom line for board members here. Is there anything that we could be doing? Or just the facts, and realities, and realities, and there's nothing more that we're not doing that we could be doing to get more air service?
There's a lot you can do. So all of these business cases have to be made. Like there are like the United Dulles opportunity, the Allegiant San Juan opportunity, and there are others. So just highlighted sort of the big ones. Can't be done if you don't have anybody making the argument. So you need to have somebody, staff. I like to think you need to have a good consultant, but it doesn't necessarily matter who that is, as long as they're competent and know what they're doing. And so, if you're not out there being visible, they will forget about you. I was on the airline side in my previous career, and they will forget about you if you do not make yourself known. And it doesn't mean you have to be annoying them. But you need to be present. You need to be, attending conferences. You need to be setting up meetings. Like we went to visit United in Chicago a few months ago to talk about the Washington opportunity, and they were, quite receptive to it. But if we hadn't gone, don't know. I'm sure they probably had looked at it, but there was no communication, and it certainly wasn't anything that we would have managed. Now we can manage that conversation more effectively. And frankly, you see how quickly air service adds to the top line. The amount of investment that usually most airports put into it or need to put into it is pretty minuscule compared to it. We're not expensive. What we do, attending a conference, a speed dating conference, isn't expensive relative to pretty much anything else an airport does. But the potential on the top line is pretty dramatic.
So in your opinion, there's not enough leisure traffic potential between here and New England to approach anyone on it? I can understand Cape Air wouldn't do it, but.
So there's so the best opportunity for Boston is going to be somebody like Delta. Okay. It's a business market. It's got to be a business market first and foremost. But it's got to be somebody that has an interest in Boston first. It's got to be somebody who is strategically growing in Boston. And Delta is going to be doing that over the next few years. But as I was mentioning yesterday, their focus is going to be on the point of sale in Boston. So they're not going to be, knocking on Olympus's door here to ask them about their Boston service. They don't necessarily care about that. But the Olympus office in Boston, that's who they're going to be caring about. And so they're going to talk to all their corporate customers in Boston, and those companies are going to drive where Delta flies. Now, as far as any other airline, there's no other. Cape Air is the regional airline for Boston. There isn't much else up there. It's all just regional affiliates of major airlines.
Yeah, I'm just thinking more something like a seasonal run up to Boston to connect to Cape Air.
Yeah,
it's like there's more people that vacation. Yeah, it's a growing number going up north.
That's why it's the business model mismatch, because there's no airlines that do that. Like Allegiant, Allegiant doesn't fly to Boston.
Right.
And if they did, they got to put 160, 170 people on each flight.
Yeah.
That's tough, especially when you have other ways to get there.
Okay. Hey, Brett, one question. I know it seems like, a logical continuation of our opportunity is low-cost travel destinations, Legion, et cetera. But tied to what Frank did recently with the surveys of the businesses, growing economy here in the local valley, a lot of larger corporations starting to establish a beachhead here. In the surveys, do they want, need, expect something that could help us service some key markets for them? Or is it kind of like a mismatch, it's all over the place, and there's not really something you can do to service the business base here in the Lehigh Valley, the growing business base?
Well, I think the fundamental thing to understand is the airlines that serve the business market are hub and spoke carriers. Bottom line, they are not going to add nonstops. American literally said, the CEO of American said a couple weeks ago that if you ever see him add a market that doesn't have a hub at one of their ends, that it's time to remove him from his job. Now, Delta has a different philosophy on this, which is why Boston's potentially an opportunity. But their interest is in the hubs and the hubs only. That's how they generate the revenue. And the reason Delta's in Boston, because Delta's actually going to turn Boston into a hub. That's why. But other than that, if it isn't a hub, they're not interested. And if you looked at that map, those are the best hubs for you. There's not a missing hub in there. There's not one you say, oh wow, this is the hub that we should have. You have the best hubs for your geography is challenging. It's not just because of Philadelphia and Newark. The geography is challenging because for the rest of the country, if I went out to Madison, Wisconsin and said, okay, where are your people going? Where are your businesses going? They're going all over the place, but a lot of them are coming to the Northeast. They're going to New York and Philadelphia and Boston and places in Hartford. That's not viable air service for you. So you actually have to take out a significant amount of the demand generating capacity for air travel in the country when you're looking at your potential market. And because most places in the country, they fly to New York. And so if you take that out, you're left with, the Midwest, the Southeast, and the West. And that is where that's the directions your hubs go. And so, I'd rather have 8 flights a day to Atlanta. I'd rather for you to have 8 flights a day to Atlanta than have, 1 flight to Dallas in addition to the 3 you have from Atlanta. It's better hub. The businesses get far better connectivity when you build volume at a hub rather than having lots of hubs with individuals. I'll give you a great example. Your United service is generally on 50-seaters, I think, right? I mean, I'd rather see those have first-class cabins. I'd rather 76-seat RJs or mainline like Delta's put on the one Atlanta flight. That's a better way forward for a market like this because then you have your corporations, they can get their first-class product, they can get to wherever they need to go easily. So that's you're better to build out the volume on the hubs you have.
I'll give you an example on that. A few years back, I was running back and forth to Chicago. I probably made that trip 35 or 40 times. I could fly out of ABE, and I would have to stay overnight either before or after to get a full day's work because of the flight times. Or I could catch a 7:30 flight on Southwest out to Midway, get a full day's work, and get an 8 o'clock flight back, and I'm home by 11. It made it very easy to fly out of Philly because of the flight the times, because then you get the flight number, and you get the times that you want to make it work better.
And it goes back to the challenge that I said about we can't do a whole lot about service to those hubs because they see their P&L. They know they control the mechanisms for capacity and pricing. So as long as they're doing that, we can't do a whole lot about it.
We got to wrap it up.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank
you very much. It's very helpful. Thanks, Brad.
I told you it'd be shorter. 3 minutes.
Yeah. All right, John, I think John's on board. Finance capital planning, we have 3 agenda items under your
Sounds good. Thank you, Chuck.
purview.
Yep. First on the agenda, I think Ryan's going to take care of the first 2. We've got the approval of contract amendment for the air cargo expansion project, apron expansion. So, Ryan?
Great. Yeah, thank you, John. Just going to hit the next one, please. So that. All right, so we had some really good discussions at our committee meeting regarding these 2 items. We'll go through kind of the highlights of where we ended up. So talked a little bit about cargo, concrete apron expansion that we did. big thing when we look at these is our strategic objectives in terms of growing cargo and the business. Cargo has been very good for us, and there was a need for a 6th aircraft parking position from the carriers back in the spring of 2017. So design was accelerated in May. We did our typical geotechnical borings and analysis. Did not find any significant findings. We actually got on site with the contractor and the engineer. We discovered some unsuitable soils that were not discovered as part of the geotechnical analysis. So the engineer, the contractor, and staff really sat down, got together to see, okay, what's the best path forward given where we currently are. So it was determined to remove the unsuitable soil, replace it with 2A PennDOT stone to make sure we have a valuable cargo apron that'll be there for many years to come. And because of that, we did have a little bit of a longer project schedule, which we encountered colder weather concrete application, which required additional blankets and warming materials to make sure that the concrete was getting put in properly. So we did end up completing the main portion of the project before the end of the year, so the cargo carriers were able to utilize it. They have been utilizing the position, but as you can see here, we still need to do this spring the paving of the ground support equipment, asphalt area, and just some final painting, marking, grading, and seating. So what we did end up doing, though, as part of looking back, is if we would have known about some of these unsuitable soils before we had started, where would that engineer's estimate cost would have been, and then where we actually ended up. So engineer's estimate would have been around $5.5 million to complete it, working with our contractor, an engineer, really going through scrutinizing costs and having some good, valuable discussions. We were able to put it down to about 4.3. So overall, we think it was a very good project that we did, but also we did learn some valuable things in terms of geotechnical technologies and kind of going above the FAA minimum requirements to make sure we don't run into these issues again. So again, we had some good, valuable discussions, but we're looking for approval for the contract amendment of that 1.5, which gives you the 4.3 total.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Can I get a motion for the approval of this project?
So moved.
So moved, John. Second? Second, Eddie. Any discussion?
I guess for the benefit of board members, just real quick, so the 6.1 million, myself included, is that what the original second bid was on this project? Just for my clarification.
If we would have accounted for the unsuitable soils that we encountered with their unit prices, quantities, those kinds of things, that's what the number would have been for the second lowest bid.
It was recast. And again, we had the unsuitable soil issue as well on the intermodal, and back when they built the airports and runways and the spoils. What?
This amendment is to the current contract?
Correct, yes. Yes. And just to follow what Ryan had said, we've now had two projects with unsuitable soil issues. We ran into it in the multimodal facility and here. So we will be doing in future projects more borings, more testing in terms of soil conditions so that we know what we're getting into sooner. One way or another, though, there's unsuitable soils relating to construction of runways many years ago, and so it's you pay it up front or you pay it after, but it kind of, I hate to say it is what it is, but we're doing everything we can to understand its cost up front. But it's good, as Brian said, good project. It's got long-term applicability beyond the lifespan of cargo as future hangar space. We have the pads stressed to 300,000 pounds in place. So any other discussion? Okay. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Carries.
Great.
Okay. John, next one is the Hangar 11 project, Ryan.
Great. Thank you. So you'll see up on the screen, and then behind me you have a couple boards, not in front of them. This is to award the bids for Hangar 11. There are 4 bids that bid packages that we had to put together as part of our state grant funding requirements. But again, talking through the importance of this project, aligning with our strategic objectives, is identified as a priority 1 business critical project in our 2018 capital budget. The big thing is we're currently at capacity here at AB. We get a lot of calls in terms of looking for additional hangar space. We have received some letters of intent to cover about 50% of the current hangar space, which is about 54,000 square feet, the total size. Again, I mentioned a state grant. We got $6.06 million from the state, which is a massive amount that we're very happy to get. It's a 50-50 match that helps cover a lot of the costs that we have. Again, staff looked at the ROI and the pro forma in terms of what we can make up and recoup with our ground rates. Again, conservative estimates. The other big takeaway here is cost of construction continues to escalate. We had a lot of meetings and follow-up with the contractor, Grace Industries, who was the low bid on the general construction side. The price of steel is very volatile right now. The prices have been going up. They're continuing to going up from what they've been seeing. But the one takeaway, and we talked a little bit about the geotechnical investigation, we did more than we did for air cargo in terms of some electromagnetic functionality and seeing basically underground as best as we can. But the big thing that we did, talking about making sure we're having conservative estimates, is putting contingencies into the project. So we have about $800,000 worth of contingencies in those 4 bid packages. You'll see they're broken out. There's general construction, which is a lot of the site civil, the concrete apron, the building construction itself, electrical, which is the lighting fixtures, other pieces that are needed in the hangar. HVAC is obviously the office core, but then in the hangar itself, making sure that has some conditioned space and airflow. And then plumbing is a lot of our fire protection pieces that we have, the foam that's required for the hangars as well. So the 4 bids you can see here, the base bids comes to about 16.3. Again, 800,000 of that is the contingency that we built in. So we're comfortable with those numbers. Reviewed it with our engineer, talked with Grace as well, and the other piece of what we're doing next upon board approval is sitting down and seeing if there's other value engineering or just other pieces of how those contingencies play in that we can make sure that we're performing the project as best as we can. But definitely recommend approval to the 4 contractors and move this project forward.
Brian, could you talk a little bit about the interest that we've had in the hangar space so far?
Sure. So I know we've gotten a lot of calls from Darren and his group. We did get a few letters of intent as well for folks that are looking to get in there. But
50% of the space, as Darren said.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, so one of the advantages as a corporate hangar, or general aviation hangar, unlike Brad's presentation with the hubs and the legacy airlines, we do have an advantage here at Allentown. The feeder airports into New York City, Morristown, Teterboro, Belmar, et cetera, are all at capacity. You need Brian Dames, our board member here, is a corporate pilot in Jersey. He can speak to that, but you need times to get into the airplane. You can't park your aircraft. A lot of issues logistically that benefit us, and as Eddie pointed out earlier, we were in a period of austerity for a lot of years. Now we're in a position with the $6 million state grant to move forward, new construction, state-of-the-art hangar, 100,000 pounds stressed concrete will handle a fully full Gulfstream. So it's an exciting opportunity, I think, for us to partner with the state with demand in hand, get out here, build a new project, and get going. And when CNS does their presentation, next agenda item, we can show for the benefit of the newer board members exactly where this hangar sits on the airfield as part of the master plan and what we're going to do beyond that step. But I would seek a motion at this point for approval of those 4 bids. John, so moved. Second? Second. Any more further discussion?
Can I just make a
Brian?
comment on Morristown? I just attended a meeting there, and there's significant construction that's going to be going on in Morristown with their runway that I think will add to some of our transient traffic. And to your point, Chuck, there is no more capacity for hangar space there. With the wetlands regulations at Morristown, they're not going to open up any more real estate. I mean, we've asked 50 times, it's just not going to happen. But, they've got, over the next 9 to 10 years, they've got significant projects that are going to be done, including shutting down the ILS for probably 2 months at a time in various time periods. So there should be, while that doesn't necessarily generate long-term tenants, it certainly will generate some transients. And Teterboro is still going through its construction phases, but I just wanted to give that little bit of coloration on Morristown itself.
Appreciate that. So in addition to the aircraft, the fuel sales, a fully fueled Gulfstream is 50,000 pounds of fuel. servicing. There's a lot of potential in the multiplier beyond just the simple parking and movement of the aircraft, so. I appreciate that, Brian. Any other discussion?
I just want to reiterate, because we're all very supportive of this project going forward. It's great. We're going to start building as opposed to our austerity situation over the last 10 years or so. But let's just reiterate, efficiency, because we're approving this budget for construction, but we talked about opportunities to be a little bit more efficient and maybe cut some costs, number one. Number two, since theoretically, I guess, $2+ million of the incremental expense that we're planning for is driven by steel pricing. Let's make sure we're very, very laser focused on steel throughout this process. And if there's anything we can do in terms of negotiate, some clawbacks, et cetera, let's make sure we do that. Because again, we're approving an extra $2 million from our original plan, principally tied to steel. So let's make sure we're monitoring that very closely. And then I think, going forward, this could be a model for how we bid out projects and how we manage them. We're adding contingency, as you see. So this is a great opportunity to just really get some really good management and good learnings for capital expenditures going forward.
Just follow on Eddie's point, this is a steel building, so we've got a lot of steel going into it. Steel's up, Chuck, about 30%-ish?
I think it's almost up to 7, depending on the size
Okay.
of the structure. Yeah, John, you're building a new bank headquarters, and we have other board members involved in the construction. And we did talk to at Executive Committee and Finance Committee, talked to the suppliers, and they're basically telling the lay people that their prices aren't going to go down. They're not going the other way. And so we have a lock until when?
We had 90 days.
There's a 90-day lock on the steel pricing. Glenn?
Are these, the bids that we're voting on, are they all sealed bids?
Correct.
All sealed bids?
Yeah, through, we use PenBid, so it's an online version of Seal.
And how many
Bids,
bidders
yeah.
did we have, Ryan?
We did receive, yeah, that's a good point. We did receive 18 different contractors between 4 different bid packages, which is great.
That's good for
great turnout.
for our project. Yeah. Okay, any further discussion? Take a vote. All in favor of approving this project? And
Aye.
4 bidders? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Okay.
John,
And then
back to you.
Yep, last we have on the Finance Capital Planning Committee agenda, or section, is an update on the master plan. Tom?
Okay, great. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Mark Champney from CNS, who's been the lead on the Master Plan Update project. I think you've got a few slides. It seems like we seem to cut you short once in a while. So we'll try to get you in here and talk a little bit to us about our update on the master plan.
Although you are standing in the way of staff's lunch, so.
That's okay, staff's
I don't
lunch
want you to speak
and
on any-
another nice day outside,
I don't want
right?
to speak on any pressure on you.
No, we'll be as brief as you want it to be. I got about 5 slides here. Just a quick update for those that haven't seen this the entire time. You have some new board members. We have about a 19-element process for the master plan. We're down to about 6 remaining items here. The highlighted red area is the key, some of the key completion items here after we have the preferred development concept. The FAA requires that preferred development concept. That's one of the pieces in addition to the forecast that they approve. So that ALP set is an important component of that. That'll follow on in the next couple of months, working through and getting that process. In order for a project to be fundable by the FAA, eligible, it needs to be justified and on that ALP set. Also, the other piece that's working in parallel is our financial analysis. How do we pay for everything we've identified here? So we don't have that solution and answer, but we do have existing sources, and we'll be looking at other opportunities for that as well. Throughout the process, we've had 5 meetings with the project advisory group. We had the last one yesterday. Really just a key group of stakeholders that's made up of folks in the community, staff, just for input as we've gone through the process. And I'll talk about on May 10th, we will have a second public workshop to present this and show this to the public. And we'll talk about the process and how that will be set up here shortly. So the preferred development concept, we've worked through an inventory looking at the regional context of the airport, what's going on in and around the region, the area, forecasts of demand, facility requirements, what's needed in order to meet that demand, and then we get to alternatives. So we've looked at multiple alternatives to address that demand. This is the result of that, which is a preferred development concept, as you can see here. And this is the exciting part. This is why I love doing master planning, because we get to try to get a vision for what this place could be like in the next 20 years. I've never seen them play out exactly as you lay out in a 20-year plan. Things are happening as we speak. You're building a hangar, you're reconstructing the runway. There's things that we have to take a snapshot, but there's things that are evolving as we go. The best is to come up with a flexible plan. So we've identified areas on the airport that can accommodate different types of growth as they occur. So all of this is demand driven. It's not a guarantee that this is what's going to happen. And we do identify that by phases. So because you've been in times of austerity and deferred maintenance, really the first 5 years is a lot of reconstruction. A lot of your funding is going towards the reconstruction of 624. It's an important component of the capital plan for the airport. And a lot of the other activity, Hangar 11 will be right here. So it's identified, it's not yet built. As well as some opportunities for cargo expansion where it exists today, cargo expansion up on the north side. Looking in the terminal quadrant, just high level, some opportunities for non-aeronautical revenue, which is consistent with one of your strategic goals of your strategic plan, and then also some terminal concourse improvements. So efficiency, passenger convenience, so vertical circulation within the terminal. Potentially some improvements to the passenger security checkpoint are also part of the plan as well. And then this is a 20-year plan generally, but talking to some of the air service and the things going on in the region, still planning. The current ALP that's approved has a third runway on it. We didn't want to not do that, so continuing that in the period beyond 20 years, we think is important to continue and carry that as a future long-term capacity enhancement for the airport. It's not needed within this 20-year period based on the numbers that we're seeing. A lot of capacity can be driven by the fleet mix. So more seats on an airplane, it's still one operation. It's the same number of operations, but you get more capacity through that. Next slide. So part of the process, the FAA requirement is to present this to the public. So we had a public workshop early last year, really talking through the forecast, what was forecasted, the approved forecast from the FAA. We'll have another one on May 10th. We have this as an open house format. We'll have stations by the phase of development. So we'll have the 0 to 5 year plan and only the 0 to 5 year plan, the 6 to 10 year plan, the 11 to 20 year plan, and then beyond. So that any focus or concerns about development that's going to happen in the near term can be addressed. But you can also talk to staff that will be on board to answer questions as well. And then we'll have a looping presentation. Some public folks like to prefer a presentation, but really the time, having more of an open house, having just a general time so people can come and go is there. But we'll have the looping presentation that will walk you through in about 3 to 5 minutes. We'll walk you through the entire process if you want to understand more. And we'll also have an ability to comment in person or on the web. All of the documentation up through facility requirements is currently on the airport's website. That's been done as part of this master plan. Last slide. And okay, so scheduling next steps, the public workshop. What's going on in the background as we finish the draft master plan report is the financial analysis and modeling. How do we pay for that preferred development concept? So if there are some adjustments that we need to make either to a project by phasing based on the affordability, that'll get done. And that'll all be produced and documented in the draft master plan report, which will be published for the public review for a period of 30 days as well. And that'll come towards the end of May into June. When the authority will review it, after their review and have their comments, that'll be put out to the public after that. That's a quick briefing.
Hold on.
Great presentation. Thanks, Mark. Thank you. John, that's it. Any comments on Mark's presentation, his update? Everyone's welcome to attend. What is that, May 10th?
May 10th, Thursday. May 10th.
What time?
4 to 7.
4 to 7, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Okay, Tom, Director's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we talked about, we did see another record month. Again, just to talk about that 14% increase for March, 6 consecutive months increase. So it's exciting to see that. We have, again, A number of things on my list we've covered here today, so I think just for purposes of time, wanted to mention Saturday, May 5th, Wings for All event, partnership that the authority has with the ARC of Lehigh Northampton counties, working with intellectually and developmentally disabled children, basically an opportunity to have a dry run on a flight. So they get an opportunity to experience the process, go through the checkpoint. This is a number of years we've been doing this event, very successful, and so we're excited to partner again with the ARC to have this event on Saturday, May 5th. We also, we mentioned the workshop, May 10th, from 4 to 7. That'll be in the second level of the terminal, so we are validating parking for that, I believe, and we'll have folks available here to talk about the master plan. At Braden Air Park, we're in the process of cutting the ribbon on a new flight school, and so we're pretty excited about that. ProFlight Aero Services will be starting in the coming weeks, and we're excited to have them on board. Excellent operation. I think our chair has had some discussions with the owner down there, and it seems like a very professional operation. We're excited to have it. In terms of some ongoing capital projects, we continue to work on our pedestrian tunnel from our main parking lot over to the terminal. Some concrete work there, looking to wrap that up in May. So we had a little winter hiatus as we were doing the concrete work, and we're back in the swing of things. And then we'll be back in front of you next month to talk about runway 624, and we alluded to that in the master plan discussion a little bit. Mark touched on that. Major rehabilitation project. We've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, working with consultants, doing a lot of geotechnical testing on that project to see what the soils are and how that project is going to shape up for us. Looking at a first phase of that project in spring, and that'll be very important because that'll be our intersection of the two runways. So a very critical phase of construction, but we're excited to come back to you next month to talk in more detail about how that's going to be shaping up. And that really concludes my report, Mr. Chair. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Any new business?
Chuck, I just wanted to add one more event, since you were listing the calendar events. There was one that was raised at the General Aviation Committee just last week, and Megan, Claire, if you don't mind, would you highlight us on that event? I think there's is it Queen City that's having?
It's 75th anniversary?
75th anniversary.
Queen City?
Is that what we're?
August 26th?
Yeah, so.
Colin's coordinating that at this point.
Yeah, coming up this summer as we continue to do events around all of our airports. We're celebrating the 75th anniversary of Queen City, so more detail to come on that, announcements to the public and things of that nature. So right now we're in planning phases, but I expect more information as we go along here towards the end of the summer.
Thanks, Colin.
You do have a new business or?
Solicitor.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
One.
Frank?
Just, we formally introduced the new executive director, Tom Stout, to the full Chamber Board of Governors yesterday. Gave him a few minutes, Colin put together a brief video. We brought him up. I must say you killed it in front of them. You're really coming around as a public speaker along with everything else. So thanks for that.
We'll invite him to more of those opportunities. We'd like to see him out there more than in here. I think it's important that that's part of his job, to be out there in front of the community, right, representing the airport. So good job, Tom. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, solicitor's report.
Just one last reminder that the financial disclosure forms are due May 1. If you haven't gotten it in, you have till May 1 to get it in. If anybody is in that position and needs some help from the solicitor's office, give us a call and we'll be of assistance to you. May 1's a deadline. Thank you.
Thanks, Judge. Any need to go into executive session today?
No executive session.
No executive session today? Okay, then I'd look for a motion to adjourn. So we'll do a second. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks.
I think that